Now, a couple other things. Breath marks. When words begin with vowel sounds, either individual vowel sounds or diphthongs, they're always, the initial vowel sound is always marked with a breath mark, what is called a breath mark. You'll notice that these two marks are similar except backwards from one another. This one's open on the left side, this one's open on the right side. Let's start with the rough breath. The rough breath indicates that an H sound precedes the vowel sound. So this one indicates a sound H. This one just indicates that there isn't a H sound. You may not like that. You may think it's a waste of effort. That's how the writing conventions developed over time in Greek, and that's what you'll encounter in printed texts. It's not hard to get used to. Look at it. This one, this letter, if it were in the middle of a word, would say ah. Since it's at the beginning of a word, presumably, it has a smooth breath on it, we still pronounce it ah. With a rough breath on it, it's pronounced ha, ha. But he. But hey. O, but ho. Notice on diphthongs that the breath mark goes over the second vowel, not the first. So, oi, but hoi. The H goes at the front of the vowel sound. Hoi. Ow, but how. And then another strange thing is that initial rows were also aspirated. That is, they had this rough breath put on the front of them. So this says hro, and this says hra. The initial row always received a rough breath. And these initial roughed up rows find themselves into English words like rhyme and rhythm and rhesus monkeys, and sometimes, for reasons I can't explain right now, even in the middle of an English word like diarrhea. Rough breaths and smooth breaths. And Greek has accent marks, 3 of them. You might be ready to panic at this point, but let's not. There are subtle differences of pronunciation that these accent marks encoded to help ancient second language, Greek as second language speakers get things right. But for the most part, at least beginners in Greek need only to get the point that each one of these accent marks at least identifies the syllable that is stressed. So, wherever you find a vowel with one of these marks over it, that's where the word receives its stress. Here are the names. This one's called an acute accent, this one's called a grave accent, this one's called a circumflex accent. You'll notice some things about them as time goes by. You'll notice that the grave accent occurs only on the final syllable of a word. You'll come to notice that the circumflex occurs only on long vowels and diphthongs. But let's not worry about that for now. Again, don't freak out about these things. Just realize that any of the 3 of these identifies where a word is, which accent in the word is stressed. And finally, there are punctuation marks. These punctuation marks are not original to the ancient world. When they wrote in all capital letters with no spaces and no punctuation. But in the centuries that followed them, editors, both ancient and modern, have come up with conventions that make it much easier for us to read, dividing words and sentences, and we can be glad of that. For the most part, you can recognize this. That's just a plain old period. It's a little fancy in this particular font, but it's just a plain old period, just like our period. And then they have a comma. The modern Greek editors use commas that are just like commas you're used to in English. The last two you'll have to pay a little attention to. This elevated dot, about this dot halfway up the line, is called a hemistop or a half stop, and it functions more or less like our semicolon. No big deal. What we think of as the semicolon has been used over the centuries as the Greek question mark. So you'll just have to remind yourself when you come across this in actual text and you're reading a sentence, at some point you'll come across these things and you'll say, oh, that's right, I remember that thing. That's a question mark. So, that's the alphabet, along with the diacritical marks, breath marks, accents, and the punctuation marks. No big deal, but you're going to have to go through the exercises, do the drills, memorize these things, make good progress, go to work.